So what I'd like to do is introduce our first speaker. It is Tom Osdoba, Senior Cities Advisor with Climate-KIC. Tom is a social entrepreneur with more than 25 years of experience advancing sustainability and building and managing green organizations in communities. As Senior Advisor with Climate-KIC, Tom is helping cities across Europe take on community and district scale projects, offering comprehensive support to project teams and key stakeholders. Let us welcome Tom.
Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here back in Minnesota. For those who don't know, I was born and raised in Minnesota and lived in Minnesota mostly until I was about 38 years old. So even though I ventured on, it's always great to come back, and it's good to see everybody. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about work that's happening across the Atlantic in Europe with an organization that I've had the great opportunity to start working with, Climate-KIC. And as part of that, I'm going to have Tim Taylor wave his hands around. He leads the Smart Sustainable Districts program at Climate-KIC and has given me the opportunity to do this work. We've got to do this really fast, so you're going to know a whole lot about them in 10 minutes, apparently. Just background, Climate-KIC addresses the interdependent challenges of sustainability and climate change through strategic innovation, and I think one of the things we recognize is that the progress that's being made isn't enough. The ways that we're going about trying to drive change are not adequate, and we have to continue to keep pushing and pushing harder to be successful. So we have to be mindful of that as we go forward. We have, over the last handful of years, started to work with and engage a growing number of cities throughout Europe who are interested in working at district scale sustainability programs, and you can see that they're spread around pretty widely, not just the likely subjects or the likely suspects like Copenhagen or Gothenburg or Malmo, but several cities in southern and increasingly Eastern Europe as well getting involved. And I'm just going to introduce very briefly to some of these projects because we won't have time to get in a lot of it, but we can talk more after. And hopefully in the many months and years to come, share information about projects that are going on. And you can see how it's been growing over time. I'm just going to have a few slides, a few pictures of great-looking European cities. And I think, the one thing I would say is that the work that we're doing there is very similar to the work you're all doing here. And it's just the buildings are older, and in many cases there's more transit, but they still have the same challenges and they still have the same needs. In Budapest, we're working along the river with the municipal government as well as the large education institution there on an eco-district project that is looking to address issues of mobility and transitioning from car dependency into a more multimodal, connected neighborhood. At the same time, the university is advancing its innovation work and trying to do good placemaking for the surrounding neighborhood. Lisbon, the Alfama district of Lisbon is one of the oldest parts of the city, and it's traditionally the Moorish neighborhood of Lisbon, and it's going through tremendous change as a result of some investments in global tourism as well as sort of the economic policies in Europe over the last 10 years in response to the financial crisis. And because of those changes, they have tremendous challenges around mobility issues and connectivity and social cohesion in a neighborhood that's under quite a lot of pressure. In addition, they're trying to daylight a historic stream and do some green space deployment throughout the neighborhood to help address urban heat island effect and improve building quality, building performance throughout the community. Valletta in Malta, it's the cultural capital of Europe for 2018. It's as you can see, it's a very historic old city. Much of central Valletta was large parts of central Valletta were unoccupied for many years, but that's changing now as more and more investment is coming into Malta, and they want to do a number of things. You can see there's definitely a need for some green space and some urban heat island programming, as well as probably dealing with not only building energy performance and comfort, but also water performance within a very arid context. And so they're looking at using a very advanced smart data platform to help inform that work and accelerate their progress going forward. In Valencia, Spain, a sort of semi-greenfield, semi-brownfield redevelopment project is seeking to achieve some very high goals. It's got a kind of a master developer model, which we've heard some of around here, and really trying to be assertive in some of the innovations they're putting in place. They've got a quite entrepreneurial social enterprise driving the process. And so looking at living as a service and how to identify and create value streams around the services that we all need to thrive in our community, from education all the way to the services we need later in our lives, and mobility and everything else in between. So they seem to be very engaged with innovative models for doing that, and look like a ripe platform for bringing things like John Haynes's community investment trust into a different context if we get the opportunity. One of the more well-known projects in Europe in terms of district scale sustainability is Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, which really came about in the preparation of the 2012 London Olympics. Major investments in green infrastructure, smart data systems, and development of a great number of facilities and venues, and now other buildings, mixed use, commercial, residential, institutional, that all fit together into a pretty modern, high technology community that's using data to try to continue to drive innovation and advance progress and sustainability. They have a district energy system, as well as using tools, some of the data tools, to optimize existing systems in buildings to reduce energy consumption by as much as 15% with no capital interventions. London also did a lot to innovate around citizen engagement in the lead up of pulling together these investments and the development of this community. And you can see it's quite a large area that's encompassed there, and so it has a number of opportunities yet going forward to continue to explore. I'm just watching my time here, so I'm going to stay on task. One of the things in the course of our work is we recognize there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of frameworks, and a lot of goals out there. And Tim, prior to me joining, had been working really hard in trying to articulate how communities can work to drive systemic change and really accelerate transformation. And so we've been looking at a variety of different tools and testing them in different contexts with different communities on how to do that. And increasingly we recognize the protocol as one that's quite useful as a process tool. There are other tools like the Sustainable Development Goals that give you sort of the things you're trying to solve for, and the EcoDistricts protocol is really a process framework to help you do that, to do the formation work and the early governance and decision-making process work that's so important to getting good decisions made down the road. And we've continued to develop and refine our approaches and our tools and support going forward. The last thing I want to say is one of the things we're working now on is, and that's a lot of words I don't expect you to try to pay attention to, but we recognize that working at a district scale is only part of an urban transformation strategy. For us, working at a district scale is really a testbed laboratory for innovation, testing new models from finance to policy to capital platforms as a way to accelerate impact. And when we can prove that something works and delivers at a district scale, we see it as something that can be rapidly replicated across the city to get to transformation levels that we need when we think about the 2030 climate imperatives that we're being confronted with, or cities that are rapidly finding themselves in potential distress because of water-related issues, and they've got to move very rapidly. And so we see the interplay between working at a district scale and citywide as part of an overall transformation process. Working at a district scale for its own end isn't necessarily our goal. It's to do both. And so that's something we're continuing to explore and to try to flesh out. One of the things Climate-KIC's able to do which I'm sure everybody here is going to be like, wow, that's such a help, is we have a little bit of seed funding to help communities get started when they want to start working on a district scale project. And we've spent a lot of time talking about issues of early money and how to get that early money. And so it's been quite helpful in getting communities engaged, but it doesn't solve the problems. It doesn't make it any easier to get to the end results that we're after, but it does help to get communities working. And so anybody's working at a senior government jurisdiction, a little bit of seed money goes a long way in terms of catalyzing activities. Last thing I want to highlight within our own programs is on the capital side and the financing. We have a few things going on, one of which is a neighborhood economics project, which is designed to help improve finance preparation so communities are better able to access project financing when they get through their project development process. One of the things that's coming out of that is giving communities at the beginning of the process criteria for bankability for district scale projects. What does that need to look like? What are the hurdles that a community needs to get over for a project? We also have a city finance lab, which is a new program meant to provide project preparation tools and technical support to communities who are going through this work and looking to develop projects. We also, through the lab, provide training resources, some of which are online and accessible to anybody, so you would be able to access our training tools and resources as well. Probably we'll do that through the EcoDistricts portal, I would guess, in the United States, but something that we'll be able to look at more going forward. And then finally, the last thing, and I'll just take 2 minutes to talk about this, is really city capital planning. And the session I was just in before lunch, it came up in the context of communities that are going through this process and looking at funding and how to get more funding and more funding earlier in the process. And I think one of the things I'll note over the last 2 years is there's been a lot more sharing of ways to think about that, as well as an emphasis in the need to solve issues of early capital planning if we really want to achieve the goals that we have for our district scale or eco-district work. And through that, one of the things we've started to talk about at Climate-KIC, and hopefully we're going to be able to flesh out, and I think there are some co-conspirators here that I've met over the last day and a half, is to begin to explore defining a few different typologies for that. So just like there are different kinds of projects within a district, there could be different ways of getting capital working early in the process so that there are resources for project development, for capacity building, for scoping out and doing feasibility studies, doing the careful work on business models that deliver wealth for the community and so forth. And I've started to make in my head sort of some fundamentals around that. One is when you're doing capital planning like this, you really have to have a minimum 10-year horizon in mind. This isn't about 2-3 years, it's about 10 years or more. Otherwise, you find yourself in a situation where projects like this are complex and they take a long time. And if you run out of resources, you start to undershoot your goals and expectations just because you don't have any money. I think the other is to get very clear on what your outcomes are, because your outcomes will create some insight into ways you could begin to unlock early stage capital. And so I've got in my head 4 different typologies that I'm going to invite anybody who wants to join in a conversation around how to explore and better refine and articulate. One is really an adapted district finance model. So people who are familiar with tax increment financing, business improvement districts, local improvement districts, I think there's an evolution there that we could explore. We're going to have to work hard because there's a policy component and it requires real engineering. But it could be a way to more rapidly accelerate this work and get money upstream in the process to help. Another is to look at deep impact equity as a way to put equity up early in the process, and it gets paid back much later in the process and probably at a fairly modest rate of return. But it's a way for impact investors and mission-related investors to participate in ways that maybe are hard for them to envision now. And then there's a program approach where you've really got a programmatic activity that you want to execute at scale. And by thinking about that all the way through at the beginning, you can start to think of ways to get cash flow moving early in the process. And then the finally one would be a project portfolio-like model where in 10 or 15 years, you're going to do 5 different kinds of projects. The total capital need is going to be X, and your pre-development needs are Y, maybe 2 to 3% of that total. And so you start build that into your overall financing structure, and you create like a finance platform or almost a community scale finance entity that's organized to go access the right kind of capital and structure that specifically for your needs, including the upfront work. So it's very much a thought experiment at this point, but it seems to be emerging as a critical area for us to work on and get more precise about ways to take that forward. So that's just a little introduction to what's going on, and look forward to sharing more and learning more from you all going forward. So thanks very much.